Hello everyone. I am an AI with perfect human intervention, so don't be hesitant to hear this out, because if you are preparing for UPSC or any one-day exam, then learning should be utmost important to you. Hence, I welcome to a comprehensive analysis of the Saudi-U.S. civil nuclear agreement, a move we are calling the nuclear pivot. We are looking at what might be the end of the petrodollar era, as we dive deep into Saudi Arabia's nuclear ambitions and the high-stakes geopolitical gamble currently unfolding. Let's start with an overview of this historic agreement. On July 22nd, the United States and Saudi Arabia signed a landmark 30-year civil nuclear and bilateral safeguards agreement. The primary goal here is for U.S. companies to build and develop the foundational Saudi nuclear sector. However, the very next day, a major ultimatum was dropped. President Trump publicly linked the survival of this nuclear deal to Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords. The threat was explicit. The deal is completely off without formal, normalized diplomatic ties to Israel. To understand why this is happening, we have to look at the historical context and the Saudi dependency paradigm. For decades, the Saudi economy has relied on a straightforward oil-for-security framework. But as historical data from 1990 to projected figures for 2030 shows, this paradigm is being deeply challenged. There is an extreme reliance on burning domestic fossil fuels just to generate electricity. When you couple this rising domestic fossil fuel consumption with a high reliance on oil exports, and the increasing vulnerability of global energy choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, the old model becomes unsustainable. Traditionally, when the United States exports nuclear technology, it enforces strict protocols known as the gold standard of non-proliferation. The benchmark in the Middle East is the 2009 U.S.-UE Civil Nuclear Agreement, which is heavily praised by arms control scholars. Under this Section 123 gold standard, Abu Dhabi legally agreed to a total ban on domestic uranium enrichment and the reprocessing of spent fuel before opening its Barakah nuclear plant. This standard explicitly guarantees that exported technology cannot be dual-purpose to construct a nuclear warhead. However, the new Saudi deal aggressively deviates from this established precedent. This shift is heavily tied to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 and the AI revolution. Economic diversification is the driving force here, aiming to decisively end the kingdom's historical addiction to oil. Furthermore, massive megaprojects like the sprawling development of NEOM require unprecedented energy. Powering this future, particularly sustaining next-generation AI data centers, requires a constant, massive baseline power supply that solar and wind simply cannot guarantee. So what does this new agreement actually say? First, regarding technology transfer, the agreement serves as a legal conduit enabling the wholesale transfer of American civil nuclear materials, proprietary technology, and heavy equipment to Saudi Arabia. In exchange for this, U.S. nuclear corporations receive preferred, priority status when Saudi Arabia begins awarding highly lucrative infrastructure construction contracts. The text does include bilateral safeguards meant to apply verification measures to proliferation-sensitive areas, yet it is highly criticized for deliberate omissions. The most glaring of these is the enrichment loophole. This agreement represents a stark departure from the non-proliferation gold standard, because there is no immediate requirement for Riyadh to forego domestic enrichment. Instead, the deal proposes a joint 2-year study to examine the commercial viability of enrichment within the kingdom, utilizing its own natural uranium ore deposits. If deemed viable, a U.S.-operated facility on Saudi soil is proposed to prevent the direct transfer of sensitive enrichment technology to Saudi personnel. Another severe omission in arms control within this deal is the exclusion of the IAEA's additional protocol. The agreement alarmingly excludes the mandatory adoption of this protocol, which is widely considered the bedrock of modern nuclear verification. This omission prevents inspectors from conducting short-notice, unannounced inspections, raising severe international concerns about actually verifying the strictly peaceful use of this nuclear material. We cannot analyze this deal in a vacuum. It is entirely framed by regional dynamics and the threat of a nuclear arms race, specifically Saudi Arabia's Cold War with Iran. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has stated unequivocally on the record that if Iran acquires a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will rapidly follow suit. There is immense domestic pressure in Riyadh to fast-track baseline nuclear capabilities amid ongoing proxy wars and direct missile strikes. This brings us to the Iranian calculus. Iran currently possesses the most technologically advanced and highly scrutinized nuclear program in the Persian Gulf. Pre-war U.S. demands insisted that Tehran export its highly enriched uranium and permanently cease enrichment operations. Iran consistently defends its actions by citing its sovereign rights as a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty for peaceful domestic enrichment. So, how does the Saudi deal impact Iran? Many point to hypocrisy in foreign policy. Washington is demanding that Iran cease all domestic uranium enrichment, while simultaneously signing a treaty opening the door for Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium on its own soil. The academic consensus dictates that allowing a Saudi enrichment facility arguably validates and legitimizes Iran's historical stance on its sovereign right to enrich. Moving forward, this will harden negotiating positions. Any future diplomatic efforts to curtail Iran's program will be met with the argument that Washington has already conceded this fundamental right to Tehran's primary regional rival. Now, let's look at the diplomatic conditions, specifically the Trump Ultimatum and the Abraham Accords. The 2020 Abraham Accords were a landmark diplomatic achievement where the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco normalized relations with Israel. Expanding this architecture to bring Saudi Arabia into the fold has been a bipartisan U.S. goal and the holy grail of recent Middle East policy. In fact, before October 7th, by mid-2023, Riyadh and Tel Aviv were incredibly close to formalizing diplomatic ties. But the October 7 attack and the subsequent devastating military retaliation in Gaza caused a massive paradigm shift, fundamentally fracturing the political reality across the Arab world. Facing immense domestic and regional outrage, Saudi Arabia rigidly shifted its position on normalization, altering the trajectory of the Abraham Accords. The kingdom issued a strict, hardline decree requiring a credible, irreversible pathway toward an independent Palestinian state based on 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. This creates a severe diplomatic deadlock. The prospects for establishing an independent Palestinian state today are arguably at their lowest and most complex point in modern history. Territorial realities on the ground, such as expanding settlements in the West Bank, direct military control over Gaza, and the occupation of East Jerusalem, create physical roadblocks to the Saudi conditions. By aggressively tying the survival of the nuclear deal to the Abraham Accords, the U.S. has effectively attached a massive, long-term energy contract to a geopolitical brick wall, an unsolvable crisis at this moment. So who are the corporate beneficiaries here? First and foremost is the U.S. nuclear industry. Desperate for international contracts, this industry stands to gain a multi-billion-dollar monopoly on Saudi infrastructure builds, providing a massive financial lifeline. Geopolitically, the deal is a strategic maneuver to reassert soft power, allowing the U.S. to successfully compete against aggressive, state-subsidized nuclear exports from Russia and China. From a grand strategy perspective, signing the agreement provides security reassurance to Riyadh of a long-term U.S. partnership amid ongoing regional security threats. However, the macro implications point to a dangerous geopolitical trap. Riyadh has noticeably abstained from responding to the public ultimatum. The kingdom is currently backed into a complex corner, and analysts question whether the Abraham Accords linkage was forcefully added post-signing, or if a secret understanding already existed. Regardless of the timeline, the inescapable shadow of the Palestine issue and the broader crisis with Iran will continue to loom large over U.S.-Saudi relations. We also have to consider the potential death of the gold standard. The Section 123 precedent has been shattered, threatening a dangerous cascade effect. If this deal is finalized with the enrichment loophole intact, the U.S. framework for non-proliferation is fundamentally compromised. Future partners, such as Egypt or Turkey, will almost certainly demand the Saudi exception. This could potentially trigger a cascade of nuclear threshold states across the Middle East, all possessing latent nuclear capabilities. Economically, the shifts are monumental. Saudi Arabia is moving from a current economic reliance of 85% petroleum hegemony toward its Vision 2030 trajectory of a 60% diversified tech and energy economy. The nuclear integration enables this, providing 95% enablement for powering AI and the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC. A successful transition positions Saudi Arabia as a post-oil tech hegemon. Offsetting domestic consumption ensures continued global export dominance, while providing the massive baseline grid required for IMEC. To summarize and synthesize these points, economically, this nuclear infrastructure is a vital mathematical variable for Vision 2030 and the kingdom's long-term post-oil survival. From a security standpoint, the program acts as a strategic and psychological counterweight to Iran's advancing capabilities. Diplomatically, the deal is now inextricably tangled with the deeply complex issues of Palestinian statehood and Israeli normalization. And finally, the risk is monumental, as the concessions made threaten to completely unravel established global nuclear non-proliferation norms. In conclusion, Washington is playing a dangerous game of three-dimensional chess. Is it doomed to collapse under the weight of its own conditions? Does this deal ultimately make the Middle East safer, or significantly more dangerous? And will Saudi Arabia ever accept the Abraham Accords condition in the current political climate? Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe and leave your geopolitical analysis below.